Welcome to, please come in if you want to. Welcome to the Health and Safety Commission meeting, June 2016. Thank you for coming. We are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then right after that, I'm going to call for a moment of silence for all the people in Orlando who have passed away in all the many tragic things in a row, but. And next, thank you for waiting so patiently. Now I'm going to call someone up for PTSD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. And I think you guys missed a recognition award for you for all of your years of service to New Directions for Veterans, as well as your aunt,
Yes,
who was
thank you.
one of the founders, along with 2 Vietnam-era vets. So thank you so
Thank you.
much on behalf of the veterans and everything that you do for them.
My pleasure.
It's
Thank you.
greatly, greatly appreciated. As Lisa said, June is PTSD Awareness Month. We've all heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. What is it exactly? It's exposure to abuse, and that's physical, verbal, sexual, violence. It's like the poor people that witnessed the Orlando shooting, or the people that were here earlier with the car crash. Natural disasters, for those of you that remember the 1994 Northridge quake, that traumatized me. Accidents, and of course, combat. What does PTSD look like? Reoccurring thoughts, nightmares, insomnia, hypervigilance, increased anxiety, irritability, insomnia. Within 6 months of the traumatic event. Statistically, 9% of the US population will be exposed to trauma in their lifetime and will go on to develop PTSD. Predictor models have found that children who are exposed to trauma are at a higher risk of PTSD. And before heading up the clinical department at New Directions, I was with a children's agency in the Valley that dealt with low socioeconomic children that came from abused homes, neglect, substance abuse parents. And as rewarding as that work was, when I first started at New Directions, they gave me a small caseload of about 5 gentlemen. And after working with these gentlemen for about 3 or 4 months, it was like seeing those same children, only as adults. And then it becomes complex trauma, because you take the trauma that those individuals suffered and you put them in a war atmosphere. It only exacerbates the symptoms. Women are more than twice as likely to develop PTSD than men, with rape, sexual molestation, and physical assaults as key predictors. With men, this is the other unknown fact, it's also rape, combat, childhood neglect or abuse. The big misnomer is that military sexual trauma only affects female vets. Out of the 5 gentlemen that I had, 3 had experienced sexual trauma, 2 in childhood, and 1 in the military at the hands of a sergeant. So it's difficult enough for these veterans to talk about trauma, but when we specifically get into sexual trauma, it's even more. It forces it more into the brain. As of 2013, 20% of the military population from Iraq and Afghanistan were diagnosed with PTSD. You may ask yourself why. During high stress, the hippocampus, which serves as like the memory holder of the brain, is compromised when someone undergoes trauma. And then when you re-experience it through stimuli, it activates all of the symptomology that before, because it was never really properly recorded in the memory. Our society has taught men in general we don't talk about our thoughts and feelings. We're men, we suck it up. The military only reinforces that further. So it gets kind of stuck. I'm not an MD, but it gets stuck in the brain. And all of that trauma from childhood, from the war, these young men and women come out broken. And instead of seeking the mental health that we provide or other agencies provide, the first go-to is unfortunately substance abuse. So we offer a co-occurring treatment for substance abuse and PTSDs. How do we treat it? There are many different modalities to treat PTSD. At New Directions for Veterans, we use CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which replaces distorted thoughts with more pleasant thoughts. We also use TFCBT, which is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm a big advocate of that. And that's more like a narrative. So, in other words, you're releasing the trauma by having the individual talk about the trauma as the clinician is writing it down. And then the goal is for that trauma to be told to a loved one. So again, it's purged from the body. The sad statistic is that the current suicide rate for the military is 22 a day. And sadly, it's mostly from undiagnosed PTSD. Some of the other modalities, which we do not use, but the VA does use to some degree of success, is exposure therapy. You know, there are some pros and cons. Some people feel that it can be re-traumatizing. Others have had great success with it. The other modality that's becoming well known is EMDR. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It was founded by Francine Shapiro, and it has to do with, she found that during trauma, the eyes move rapidly, and by techniques, I'm not trained in EMDR, I have several colleagues that are, but through different instruments, you're able to distract the brain and then replace it with the healthy thoughts. So lastly, let's talk about prevention. What can we do? Well, first, psychoeducating people about PTSD, bringing awareness to PTSD, taking it out of the shadows, that it's, as I said, 10% will go on to develop it. What the military is doing now is they're psychoeducating people after the fact, or like a debriefing. It's my personal feeling that before these young men and women go into the service, that they're fully prepared to deal with trauma, to talk about it, and also to get treatment. I encourage all of you, if you know someone that suffers from PTSD, from any of those horrible incidents, to please contact a professional. If you want more information on PTSD, you can visit the National Center for PTSD at www.ptsd.va.gov. Or if you'd like to know more about New Directions for Veterans, our website is www.ndvets.org. So once again, thank you from my heart for all of your years of service and for providing this wonderful service for the vets that's, you know, for one of the last remaining actual treatment centers. And so we want to continue offering that service for many years to come to our vets.
Thank you for your thorough and very informative presentation to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr.
And-
Demeter?
I just
Any-
want to thank you for coming and educating everybody. It is
Oh.
a huge issue, and I think you've explained it so well.
Oh, well, thank you.
I just encourage people, if they feel that they or someone they know has it, to seek professional help.
Yes, exactly,
It works.
and not be embarrassed. Yes.
My compliments as well, and thank you for a great presentation. I enjoyed it very much, and it's nice to know that this type of help is out there.
Thank you, sir.
I echo my colleagues as well. Great presentation, and I learned a lot from it as well. So hopefully whoever saw or is watching it, it will find if there are people that need help to direct them towards your organization.
Well, that's quite a compliment coming from you. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo my colleagues' compliments. Thanks for really educating us so nicely. And I've always been interested as well in knowing how information about PTSD is communicated to people who are not maybe recent vets, but vets from Vietnam era. I remember once at the Beverly Hills Rotary, which I'm proudly a member, on Veterans Day, we host a group of veterans, and there were a lot of them who only recently identified themselves as being victims of it, even though their traumatic experiences went back to the Vietnam era military service. I think a lot of it is, you just taught us, is reflected or played out in substance abuse of different kinds. I was just wondering, is there any particular kind of outreach to that cohort of veterans from years past who may be, suffering all these years and not perhaps had the awareness at the time that they had their military service, because this was not widely known in those years?
I can speak for the VA, even though we're not part of the VA. As I said before, we're a nonprofit. We're on the grounds of the VA, but I know the VA does a great deal of education on PTSD, and most vets that are service-connected can receive help through the VA as well. And so I'm sure and they also have groups, cohort groups from different wars. And I know for a fact a lot of our clients participate in some of the Vietnam as well as the more recent wars to talk about their experiences in a
Good.
group setting. So I think the VA or the PTSD website would be the best
That's good to know.
outlet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank you again.